Hi, my name is Clint Davis, and this is my Session 5 oral briefing presentation for this class. For the subject for the oral briefing, I have chosen to cover the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri. On August 9th, 2014, Darren Wilson, a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, shot and killed an unarmed young man named Michael Brown in what was deemed a case of self-defense. According to the most thorough account of the incident, after receiving news of a theft in progress over the police band radio, Wilson spotted two men fitting the description of the thieves walking west on Canfield Drive in Ferguson. Wilson then stopped his police vehicle and called out to the two young men. According to his account, Michael Brown then cursed at him and did not comply. At this point, Wilson, suspecting these young men were the perpetrators of a theft at a local market, called for backup and then barricaded the road in front of the suspects. According to Wilson, he then tried to open his door, at which point Michael Brown blocked his ability to do this. Wilson then stated Brown then reached through the open window of his police vehicle and punched him in the jaw. This was supported by the bruising on Officer Wilson's jaw, as well as samples of Michael Brown's DNA that were found afterwards on Wilson's collar. At this point in the scenario, according to Officer Wilson, the only accessible defense weapon he had was his firearm, which he unholstered and started to draw on Brown. As he did so, according to Officer Wilson's account, Brown reached inside the vehicle once again and tried to take the gun. In the struggle that followed, Officer Wilson shot Brown in the right hand. This account as well was supported by forensic evidence after the incident during the investigation. After being shot in the hand, Michael Brown then ran away from Officer Wilson's vehicle to head east back down Canfield Drive. Officer Wilson then ran after him. Then suddenly, Brown turned and started running back towards Officer Wilson. According to Officer Wilson's account, he then repeatedly told Brown to stop and get on the ground, to which Brown's only reply was to keep moving toward Officer Wilson. Then Officer Wilson allegedly saw Brown reach in the waistband of his pants as though he was reaching for a weapon. Altogether, Officer Wilson fired 10 shots at Michael Brown, resulting in Brown having 8 bullet wounds, one of which was a fatal shot to the head. Brown's body lay in the street for over 4 hours before being removed. Eyewitness accounts of the incident vary, and the incident polarized the already tense community of Ferguson. After a grand jury and investigation by the police department, actually the Justice Department, Officer Wilson was cleared of any wrongdoing and was not indicted. He also no longer works for the department any longer due to racial tensions in the area. While many support Officer Wilson's account and his actions, many others also question whether justice was actually done in this case. There are several questions here to be answered. The first is, how well did the agency identify and communicate with key community stakeholders? According to Wilson's own accounts and many others, the agency did not identify with the African American community in Ferguson well at all. According to the report released by the Justice Department on the incident, it had been concluded that the town of Ferguson was characterized by a deep-seated racism, meaning the local law enforcement agencies intentionally targeted local black citizens, arresting them in disproportionate measure to white citizens, and fining them excessively. Thus, the local authorities do not have an effective rapport with the African American community in Ferguson, or at least they did not at this time. The next question was, how effectively did the agency work with the media in sharing information with the public? The agency seemed to be transparent with the public at the time. The day after the shooting happened, Police Chief John Belmar of St. Louis County told reporters during a press conference that Brown or his companion, Mr. Johnson, allegedly pushed Officer Wilson back into his car as he was trying to get out and then proceeded to physically attack Officer Wilson. Police Chief Belmar also stated that at some point Brown and Wilson struggled over Wilson's weapon, during which point a shot was fired in the car. He also stated that it was at this point that Officer Wilson got out of his car and shot Michael Brown. This was an abbreviated version of the events as they would be related to the Justice Department and the grand jury, which were later supported by the forensic evidence during the investigation. To what level did the agency's presence on social media help or hurt overall communication with the public? Well, on one hand, the Washington Post reported that there were a number of African American witnesses who provided corroborating testimony supporting Officer Wilson's version of the events surrounding his shooting of Michael Brown. This would appear to help the case, although whether it helped communication with the police cannot be certain. Conversely, there was a cell phone video that had been taken at the scene, I'm sure there were several, which documented Michael Brown's body laying in the street uncovered, as it did so for 4 hours after the shooting. This obviously hurt overall communication with the public, particularly the African Americans in the community where this happened. Additionally, it should be noted that Michael Brown's family paid for a separate autopsy on Michael Brown, the results of which seemed to conflict with the county coroner's official report, which was somehow leaked to the public. The results of the family's private autopsy seem to imply the possibility that one of the wounds on Michael Brown's arm could have been received while he had his arms up as if to surrender, which was an account some eyewitnesses at the scene had stated, while the county autopsy results apparently did not indicate this. This obviously must have hurt the agency's relationship with the surrounding community, specifically the African American community. In fact, there were protests and quite a bit of unrest in Ferguson over the incident after it happened. Again, the entire relationship that the Ferguson, Missouri police appeared at the time to have with the community's African American citizens appears to have been very racially tainted and negative in many, many aspects. Was it my impression that the agency had a plan in place for coping with the crisis? In other words, do I think the agency had considered what information should be shared? Did they have a plan for who would conduct briefs? Was there a plan in place to work with concurrent and adjacent agencies, for example? This is hard to say. On one hand, once again, to all appearances, the agency did appear to have some sort of a plan in place, as evidenced by the police chief of St. Louis County, John Belmar, releasing the official press statement the next day instead of the police chief of Ferguson himself, Thomas Jackson, who was nonetheless present at Chief Belmar's press conference, it must be noted. Additionally, the agency appeared to cooperate with the Justice Department during the investigation as well as the grand jury. In my research, I found nothing to indicate anything to the contrary. However, the fact that the police chief of St. Louis County was involved in the press conference could also suggest the opposite to anyone that is reading into it. In other words, they might take it that the local Ferguson agency was not equipped to deal with a crisis of this nature, and so the county police chief had to step in with his communication staff. Another question is, was the agency's communication response to the crisis integrated with the local municipality? And if so, how? This depends on how one views the integration. On one hand, the agency appeared to do everything required to work with the Justice Department and the grand jury during the following investigation. However, on the other hand, there does not appear to have been any extra effort to reach out to the African American community after the incident to try and comfort them or to have an honest effort to be transparent with them and try to address exactly what happened and why. I couldn't find any of that in my research at all. Another question is, how well did the agency follow what might be considered best practices in terms of their communication plan? You know, it would appear that these decisions were made for the agency. Again, it appeared to me that these kind of decisions were made at an upper level, at the upper echelon, by the police chief of St. Louis County, John Belmar, and his staff, because they appeared to step in and conduct the communications plan overall to me. And overall, it appeared that once the shooting happened, it was the overall St. Louis County authorities who were better prepared than the Ferguson police were. Did the agency foster a sense of trust in how they communicated with the public? And how could any biblical values have been integrated into the information sharing strategy used in a crisis incident such as this? The agency itself did not appear to have the trust of the public prior to the incident. That trust had been eroded. Trust should be the ultimate goal of any interaction between the community, which consists of businesses, faith-based members, city leadership, school students, and so forth. And the police as well, because you're building that relationship between all those members of the community and the police department. As stated in the Justice Department's report, the data gathered by the Justice Department showed that the Ferguson Police Department's overall approach to law enforcement, which was shaped by pressure to raise revenue for the city, had resulted in ongoing patterns and practices of violations of the Constitution on the part of the Ferguson Police Department towards the community citizens, particularly towards African Americans. As bad as the trust factor was between the Ferguson Police Department and the African American community itself, it did not appear to make a difference in how the agency communicated with the public. The communication relationship was already so badly tainted, it really was non-existent almost. At least it seemed to me in the reports. Biblical values could have been integrated not just with this crisis, but also in the very beginning on the part of the Ferguson Police Department by not engaging in any kind of racial bias and practices of racism, resulting in the abuse of the civil rights of its African American citizens on the magnitude that it seems to have taken place. Acts 10:34 through 35 state that God is not partial, but in every nation the man who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. In Matthew 23:8, Jesus stated, "All of you are my brothers." In the Lord's eyes, all men are created equal. And if the Ferguson police had embraced this worldview, this entire incident might have been avoided and Michael Brown might still be alive. There were prevailing attitudes on both sides, on the part of the Ferguson Police Department and on the part of the African American community, as a result of the actions of the Ferguson Police Department that led to this incident. So this was a very sad case for me. I have no doubt that Officer Wilson acted in a manner befitting his training and did what he was supposed to do. However, it would seem that Michael Brown had grown up in that generation with and resenting the racial bias of the Ferguson Police Department officers. And that shaped his attitudes. And that alone was responsible for this situation. To me, that was the primary factor. If the Ferguson Police Department had from the very beginning had a different rapport and had gone the extra mile to establish that with its African American citizens, this incident might never have taken place. And Michael Brown might still be alive today. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And God bless.